Boston's Freedom Trail is a path steeped in history, a 2.5-mile long route that takes you past 16 historically significant sites. It's a well-trodden path for tourists, but for locals like me, it's also a popular running route. On cool mornings, the trail offers a chance to immerse oneself not just in exercise, but also in the echoes of revolutions past. It was one such morning, the city still shrouded in mist, that I encountered something profoundly inexplicable. I was nearing the Paul Revere house, lost in thought, when the distant sound of footsteps caught my attention. They were rhythmic, unmistakably those of another runner. However, the steps sounded older, more like the clatter of dress shoes than modern sneakers. Curious, I increased my pace, attempting to catch a glimpse of the fellow early bird. Rounding a corner, I saw him, a man dressed entirely out of time. His attire resembled the colonial era, breeches, a waistcoat, and even a tricorn hat. Oddly, he seemed to shimmer, his form not entirely solid, more like a figure rendered in watercolors. He was not one of the reenactors of the area. Of that, I was sure. The man ran with a purpose, occasionally glancing over his shoulder with an expression of deep concern, as if being chased. He didn't seem to see me, though. Deciding to follow, I kept a respectful distance. The journey felt timeless, every footfall resonating with whispers of yesteryears. As we neared the old State House, the man's pace became frantic. It was then that I recalled a tale I'd once heard, a patriot during the American Revolution who had been entrusted with a message vital for the colonial leaders. He was pursued relentlessly, but was said to have mysteriously vanished without delivering his message, changing the course of a pivotal battle. Reaching the old State House's steps, the phantom runner suddenly stopped, his form dissipating into the morning fog, leaving behind only silence. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to process what I'd witnessed. My city, Boston, was not just a guardian of the past. It was an active participant in its retelling. Now, whenever I lace up my running shoes and hit the Freedom Trail, I do so with reverence, understanding that every step taken is not just a stride forward, but also a journey back into the embrace of Boston's history. In 2003, fresh out of high school, I was living in a quaint town in the Rocky Mountains of British Columbia. Despite its breathtaking altitude and scenic views, it was a place with a small populace, exuding a distinctly rural vibe. One night, my best friend and I found ourselves lounging in her Honda Civic. We had parked on a secluded dirt road, deep within the woods, ensconced by trees with a clearing overhead. As we chatted away, reveling in the melodies of our favorite tracks and enjoying some devil's lettuce, the clock neared 1 o'clock in the morning. Out of the blue, a strange phenomenon occurred. Every inch of our surroundings, the sky above and even the interior of our car, were illuminated by an intense neon blue light. This glow, which lasted for about 2 to 3 seconds, was unique because it was completely omnipresent. It didn't cast a shadow, it didn't really have a source. It wasn't like a spotlight. It felt as if the light permeated everything and vanished as quickly as it appeared. Our initial reaction was shock. We first thought maybe it was the police, but a quick scan of our environment confirmed our isolation. No soul in sight, and the town was enveloped in its usual nocturnal stillness. Without exchanging many words, driven by a sense of unease, we started the car and made our way home. To this day, we have no idea what that light could have been. I work as a bartender in a quaint town nestled in the suburbs of Vancouver, British Columbia. The establishment I work at is housed in a heritage building, standing proudly on the main street. Over a century old, it opened its doors, I believe, as a hotel in the 1920s, or perhaps even earlier. From the moment I began working there a year ago, whispers of a resident ghost circulated among the staff. My general manager and coworkers would recount their eerie experiences, unexplained events that left a chill in the air. More than once, as we settled the cash register at the end of the night, items that had no reason to fall would spontaneously tumble, startling us. Inconsequential things, like plates with sugar or salt, would suddenly take on a foreboding presence. However, one particular night stands out, an experience so strange that I still grapple with its reality. It was nearing midnight, our official closing time, and the only souls remaining were my general manager, the chef, a line cook, and a friend who awaited my shift's end. Given the peacefulness of the evening, I had wrapped up my duties early and decided to step outside for a cigarette. Adjacent to the bar is a liquor store, accessible from the back of our building. A stairway leads down to the back street, and to the right there's a door to a shared storage room, which proves handy if we ever run low on supplies during a busy evening. Only a privileged few, my general manager among them, possess a key to this room. As my cigarette neared its end, I began my ascent up the stairs. Midway, I noticed a hand from within, pulling the back door closed. The light from the room streamed out, and I presumed my general manager had ventured in, perhaps to retrieve something. However, as I entered the bar, there he was, seated as before. Puzzled, I said, "I just saw someone slip into the storage room. I thought it was you, but here you are." His casual demeanor shifted in an instant. Rising briskly, we both headed to the storage area. He unlocked the door, disarmed the alarm, and scoured the room. Moments later, he returned, confirming that the room was empty. We often play pranks on each other, but the gravity of my expression assured him that this wasn't one of those times. With a mix of amusement and unease, he said, "Well, it seems like you've had your introduction to our resident ghost. Welcome, I guess." In 2007, I frequently traveled between Alberta and British Columbia with my then boyfriend, whom I'll refer to as John. The journey was breathtaking, meandering through mountains, glacial lakes, and impressive rock formations. I mention these details because I have a hunch they're relevant, though it's just a gut feeling. One particular morning before a trip, something shifted in my mind. I can't determine if something external caused this or if I was the catalyst. Although it might sound like I'm describing a schizophrenic episode, I want to clarify that I have PTSD and bipolar 2, but not schizophrenia. If this doesn't fit the narrative, it's okay. The day started as any other, but a bizarre conviction overtook me. I felt certain that John was planning to kill me in the mountains on behalf of my father. This idea was preposterous. Neither my father nor John had any reason or inclination to harm me. Convinced of this alternate reality, though, I confronted John. It seemed he shared this disturbing belief. He evaded my questions. And as my distress grew, his demeanor changed. His voice altered, and subtle changes appeared on his face. He seemed to morph into someone else, a transformation I can't quite explain. Everything became surreal, like a lucid dream. The depth and complexity of the conversations and situations we found ourselves in were overwhelming. We discussed topics that I can't recall. At times, John seemed to alternate between himself and this other entity, who I whimsically identified as Satan or a manifestation of pure evil. Sounds crazy, right? By this time, I had worked as an escort in the city for about 3 years. This trip marked a turning point, and I left that life behind. Fast forward a bit, and things became even stranger. We had taken a different route, one that John was familiar with from his work travels. However, our journey between places seemed unnaturally fast, and the towns en route seemed incomplete or transitional. Time felt distorted. Though in real time, our trip took 3 days, it felt like a week had elapsed. When we finally reached the city, reality seemed to reassert itself, though not entirely. We intended to pick up furniture, but although I remember having the furniture later on, the act of acquiring it remains hazy. After leaving the city, the night seemed to fall suddenly, and we were back on that eerie road. Our reality became fragmented, shifting between different states of awareness. At times, John transformed into that malevolent being, while at other moments he was just John. We found ourselves trapped in a looping timeline, one that only progressed when we made the right change. As things escalated, John's intent seemed murderous. I felt trapped in this cycle of dark and light. In my desperation, I prayed fervently, seeking help. Suddenly, I was outside the truck, running along the road, with John, or that other thing, chasing me in the vehicle. Despite the terror, I resolved to keep running, driven by sheer will. Then, abruptly, I was back in the truck with John. The terrifying alternate reality still lingered, but it slowly began to fade as daylight approached and we neared familiar places. There were a few lingering time loops, but we eventually returned home, where time flowed normally once again. John and I tried to process what happened. Initially, we discussed it in depth, but over time, John avoided the topic. The initial belief that he intended to kill me remained unexplained and unfounded. When I recounted the story to my father, he was upset, suspecting that I was using drugs or losing my sanity, but neither was true. For years, I have tried to locate that mysterious high road, but I've never succeeded. On 2 occasions, I felt I saw others using this road, once with a former boss after a traumatic work incident, and once with someone linked to my past in escorting. Both experiences predated that bewildering trip with John, and I can find absolutely no evidence that that road exists. To this day, I don't know what happened, and I can't explain any of these experiences. I'm from northern British Columbia, Canada. A few years ago, my friend invited me to join him, his mother, and sister at a resort beside a lake roughly 90 minutes from our town. This trip occurred at the cusp of June and July. Now, I term it a resort because while it has a primary log building, which functions as both a check-in spot and a restaurant, it's mostly just a collection of log cabins with spaces near the lake for RVs. So, resort is in very heavy air quotes. The location is predominantly surrounded by expansive forests, with the only real disruption being the highway that slices through the woods. Despite a few scattered houses around the lake, it's generally a quiet area, unless it's a holiday weekend. A winding road connects the cabins to the main building, which is a brief 5 to 8 minute walk. Beyond the main structure, there is a clearing with tables, seemingly untouched for a decade given the overgrown vegetation around them. A short distance from these tables, within the woods, lie 2 lagoons encircled by an old wire fence. We arrived in the evening, familiarized ourselves with our cozy log cabin, and began exploring. The first day was fairly uneventful, but the next day's overcast and rainy weather was surprisingly welcome. It ensured fewer visitors, granting us more freedom. Our explorations led us to the clearing with the old tables, which clearly hadn't been used in ages given the encroaching nature. Delving further, about 50 feet into the woods, we discovered the lagoons. An intriguing detail was a section of the wire fence, flattened as if a large animal had passed over it. We nonchalantly dismissed it and continued our exploration, intending to return later. However, our next visit was cut short by strange noises, reminiscent of footsteps from the previous day's path. This experience kept us on edge, but we rationalized that it might just be the local wildlife. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, we even ventured to another forested spot near the cabins, where, oddly enough, we heard echoes of our own actions. It was like somebody mimicking our branch-breaking sounds. This was even more unsettling when we realized the unlikelihood of another person being in that same remote spot. Later that evening, our attempts to recreate the sounds were interrupted by a strange and frightening sight, a shadowy figure hiding behind a tree. Panic took over and we fled back to our cabin. That night's discussion was more sober as we tried to make sense of the figure and the sounds. Fast forward a year and we were back, this time with an additional friend. We briefed him about our prior adventures, which he met with skepticism. Yet the ensuing days made a believer out of him. Our encounters this time were mostly around the lagoon area. We again heard the footsteps, and, on our last day, a terrifying, indescribable screech. Investigating, we were met with a sudden, massive sound of something heavy hitting the ground. We fled in terror, only to later encounter a black bear, which, to our astonishment, seemed just as afraid and bolted away. It wasn't afraid of us either. It was running from the direction where we had just had our encounter. It barely even looked at us. As I contemplate revisiting this year, I recount this story to seek insights. 2 distinct entities seem to reside there: the elusive woodsman or tree knocker, and the aggressive entity that we have dubbed the Screecher. Despite scouring the internet, I have found no similar experiences. Does anybody have insights or theories about these mysterious presences? The location, despite its oddities, is genuinely picturesque and offers great amenities. It's known as Purdon Lake Resort, with a notable green roof. Anyway, I welcome any theories about what might be lurking there. I don't know her name, nor do I wish to. I'm not even sure if she's female. All I'm certain of is that around 2:30 in the morning, sometimes I awake to find her standing in front of my window. But let's start from the beginning. When I was 2, my uncle tragically passed away due to an accident involving a patch of ice at the bottom of a hill. I don't remember much from then, but I distinctly recalled dancing at the cemetery during his funeral. Clad in an outfit I was cautioned not to dirty, I noticed everyone's somber expressions. There was a sea of mourners, including children who appeared a bit unusual. Ignoring their oddity, I danced with them, executing the innocent, clumsy steps of a child. My aunt, upon noticing, admonished me, "Stop dancing with the dead. It's inappropriate." The rest, up until I was 8, is based on my mother's account. After the funeral, I would often point out peculiar individuals among us, describing them as old, sometimes hurt-looking people. Given her belief in the supernatural, my mother deduced that I was seeing spirits and advised me to disregard them. I heeded her words until one night when I was 8. I can vividly recall that night. As I lay in bed, I awoke abruptly to a street light illuminating my room through the curtains. Before me stood a woman in an old-fashioned dress, reminiscent of Victorian times, positioned inexplicably in front of my window, even though my dresser blocked its access. From the back, she appeared ordinary, perhaps a spirit from a bygone era. But when she turned, I was met with a haunting sight. Where her eyes should have been, there were black voids, and her chest bore a similar darkness where her heart should be. While she emanated no threat, I instinctively sensed her abnormality and ran to my mother in terror. Thereafter, I started experiencing nightmares related to my surroundings. Whether it's an animal or human suffering, these dreams always tie back to the land I reside on, leaving me emotionally drained. Once, I sought counsel from a priest who suggested she might be a demonic entity blocking my spiritual sight. His advice was to seek spiritual guidance from a variety of sources, including shamans and white covens, given my lack of strict religious affiliation. The uncanny aspect is that when I've researched the histories of places related to my nightmares, they often mirror the horrors I've witnessed in my dreams. Though I discuss my ability to see ghosts openly, I mostly ignore them now, just as my mother advised. It's bizarre yet fascinating to witness figures from the 1800s amidst the hustle and bustle of modern-day Vancouver, tangible yet not. Out of an abundance of caution, I've undergone several medical examinations to rule out any neurological or psychological disorders. The results revealed high-functioning autism, but no conditions that could induce hallucinations. I maintain a clean lifestyle, abstaining from drugs, alcohol, and smoking. This leaves me puzzled. Why do I see these apparitions? Is this woman truly demonic? And if she shields me from painful memories, do I want her to depart? Unfortunately, I am left with more questions than answers. I've always been an outdoorsy type, eager to explore every inch of the world's natural beauty. The Maine woods were no exception, and I'd ventured deep into them countless times. Every now and then, locals would talk about eerie occurrences, disappearances, strange cries at night, and even whispered legends of a creature known as the Rake, an almost skeletal humanoid entity with elongated limbs and lifeless eyes. I dismissed these tales as old wives' tales, but I would soon regret my skepticism. It was late July, and I was taking a solo trek through the forest to clear my mind. The canopy of green above me was a comforting sight, and the songs of birds echoed in the distance. I'd set up camp near a creek, enjoying the solitude and the symphony of water trickling over the rocks. As darkness fell, I prepared a fire and settled into my tent, my flashlight and Swiss Army knife within arm's reach, just in case. The air was unusually dense that night, thick with a tension that draped over the forest like a dark veil. I shook off the feeling and slid into my sleeping bag, dismissing it as the product of an overactive imagination. In the dead of night, a rustling outside my tent yanked me from my sleep. My heart pounded as I grabbed my flashlight, unzipping the tent just enough to poke my head out. The beam of light danced through the trees, but found nothing. Slightly relieved, I told myself it was probably just a raccoon or a squirrel, but the tension in the air still held its grip on me. I tightened the zipper and returned to sleep. Not long after, I was awakened again, this time by an unholy screech that echoed through the woods. It was a sound that defied description, like the scream of a woman combined with the roar of an animal. I felt my blood freeze, my body paralyzed with fear. As quickly as I could, I put on my boots and grabbed my knife. With a flashlight in hand, I stepped outside the tent. The forest had fallen ominously silent. Even the creek seemed to murmur more quietly, as if aware of the dread that hung in the air. I began to move cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the dark. I told myself I would investigate only a little before turning back. Just when I thought I couldn't handle any more suspense, I saw it. A figure no more than 50 feet away was hunched over, drinking water from the creek. It was skeletal, but covered in patches of skin, its elongated limbs disturbingly human, yet entirely wrong. I nearly dropped my flashlight when it turned toward me, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light. In that moment, I felt a terror that eclipsed all rational thought. My legs carried me back to my tent faster than I'd ever moved. I tore it down in record time, throwing everything into my backpack. I didn't look back until I was well away from that clearing, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. When I finally emerged from the forest, bathed in the first light of dawn, I knew something had changed in me. The woods would never again be a sanctuary. They were now a place where nightmares could step out of the shadows and into reality. I never reported my experience, knowing the ridicule and skepticism that would greet me. Even now, years later, I can't find a logical explanation for what I encountered that night. But one thing is certain. The cryptic legends of Maine's forests hold a truth far more terrifying than any tale, and whatever that creature was, it's still out there, lurking in the depths of the woods. And so I tell you this story with a warning. Be wary of the forest's edge, for beyond it might lie horrors that defy understanding. The woods of Maine had always held a special place in my heart, ever since my family began vacationing there when I was a child. The tall pines, the craggy coastlines, and the deep sense of isolation made it the perfect escape from the pressure of everyday life. This year, I invited some friends, Mike, Sarah, and Liz, to join me on a camping trip, blissfully unaware that this particular venture would be unlike any other. We set up camp deep in the woods, far from the well-trodden tourist paths. Our campsite was idyllic, encircled by ancient trees and just a stone's throw away from a tranquil lake. We spent the day fishing, swimming, and basking in the beauty of our surroundings. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. It was then that Mike, a Maine native, brought up the local legend of the Pocomoonshine Lake Monster, a serpent-like creature rumored to inhabit the depths of a lake not too far from where we were camping. "It's supposed to be massive," he said, "with scales like armor and eyes that glow in the dark." We all laughed it off, attributing the legend to the vivid imaginations of bored locals. But as the fire dimmed, we retreated to our tents, and the atmosphere changed. The woods, which had felt so inviting during the day, now seemed to close in around us, as if hiding secrets in the shadows. It must have been around midnight when I first heard the noise, a low rumble, like something large moving through water. I unzipped my tent and peered out into the darkness, my eyes straining to adjust. There it was again, this time accompanied by a series of splashes and the sound of something heavy dragging itself along the ground. Curiosity getting the better of me, I woke up Mike and Sarah, and together we grabbed our flashlights and cautiously made our way toward the lake. And there, in the water, illuminated only by the silvery glow of the moon, was an enormous serpent-like form, its scales glistening, and its eyes, two glowing orbs, fixated on us. In a state of collective shock, we scrambled back to our campsite, adrenaline coursing through our veins. Liz, roused by our hurried movements, stared at us in disbelief as we recounted what we'd seen. "We need to stay in our tents until morning," Mike said, his voice tinged with a gravity I had never heard before from him. We huddled in our tents, too terrified to speak. That's when the scratching began. Slow, deliberate, and unnervingly close, like the sound of talons dragging along the canvas walls of our tents. The noise circled the campsites, stopping and starting, but always there, a maddening soundtrack to the longest night of our lives. As dawn broke, the scratching finally ceased, replaced by the familiar sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves. We emerged from our tents, visibly shaken but unharmed, our campsite untouched. Packing up as quickly as we could, we left that place, vowing never to return. And while we never spoke of that night again, the experience bonded us in a way nothing else could, a shared encounter with the unexplained, forever etched in our memories. Now, when I hear tales of cryptids or local legends, I no longer dismiss them as mere folklore, because in the remote woods of Maine, we came face to face with something that defied explanation, something that turned skeptics into believers, and a casual camping trip into a haunting encounter with the unknown. Hollywood, the city of dreams where stars are born and legends are made. Yet beneath the glitz and glamour, there's a haunting tale that locals dare not speak of after dark. A tale rooted in the very symbol of stardom, the Hollywood sign. I moved to Los Angeles with hopes of making it in the film industry. One evening, after a particularly rough day of rejections, I decided to hike up to the Hollywood sign, thinking it might inspire me, or at least offer some solace. As I neared the iconic letters, the city lights below twinkled like a blanket of stars, but a melancholic breeze carried an eerie lament, a soft, sorrowful song that seemed out of place in the quiet night. I soon realized I wasn't alone. A ghostly figure of a woman stood precariously on one of the letters, her vintage 1930s attire flowing around her as she gazed longingly at the city below. Recalling the tales I'd heard, I recognized her as Peg Entwistle, a young actress from the golden age of Hollywood. Legend says that after facing numerous setbacks in her acting career, she tragically leapt to her death from the very sign that promised fame and fortune, and now her restless spirit is said to haunt the symbol of the dreams that eluded her in life. Drawn by a mix of curiosity and empathy, I approached her. She turned her gaze to me, her eyes deep pools of sadness. "The city of dreams," she whispered, "is also a city of broken hopes." Before I could respond, a gust of wind swept through, and she vanished, leaving only the haunting echo of her words. As I descended the hills, the city lights seemed dimmer, the dreams they promised more distant. But Peg's story was a stark reminder that success isn't just about glitz and glory. It's also about resilience in the face of despair. Now, every time I glimpse the Hollywood sign, I remember Peg and the countless others whose dreams remain intertwined with the city's luminous facade. While Hollywood promises stardom to many, it's the whispered legends of its hills that remind us of the real stories, dreams, and spirits that linger long after the credits roll. The Pacific Coast Highway is renowned for its breathtaking views, with towering cliffs on one side and the vast expanse of the Pacific on the other. It was on this scenic drive, specifically near Big Sur, that my perspective on reality was forever altered. I had always been a road trip enthusiast. One summer evening, with my trusty old Jeep and a playlist of classic rock anthems, I set out on PCH, hoping to find solace in the rhythm of the road and the symphony of crashing waves. As night descended and the stars began to twinkle, I decided to pull over at a secluded lookout near Big Sur. I set up camp, kindling a small fire and reclining on the hood of my Jeep, ready to indulge in some stargazing. Hours passed in silent contemplation, but as midnight approached, a peculiar glow appeared on the horizon. At first, I brushed it off as a passing ship or aircraft. However, the light grew brighter and began to pulsate in rhythmic patterns, casting eerie reflections on the ocean's surface. Suddenly, a beam of light shot down from the source, illuminating the waters and revealing the unmistakable silhouette of a massive, disc-shaped object hovering silently above the sea. The object emitted a low hum, and intricate patterns of light danced across its surface. Frozen in awe and fear, I could only watch as smaller luminous orbs detached from the main craft and began to gracefully maneuver over the coastline, weaving through the trees and cliffs of Big Sur. Without warning, the orbs converged back to the larger craft, which then emitted a blinding flash. When I regained my vision, the mysterious object and its smaller counterparts had vanished, leaving only the starlit sky and the rhythmic sound of waves. I spent the rest of the night replaying the event in my mind, struggling to rationalize what I had witnessed. By dawn, with no evidence other than my own memories, I resumed my journey, the magic and mystery of Big Sur now forever intertwined with an extraterrestrial enigma. To this day, I often find myself gazing skyward, pondering the vastness of the universe and our place within it. The Pacific Coast Highway may offer travelers stunning vistas of Earth's beauty, but for me, its true wonder lies in a fleeting moment when the boundaries of our reality expanded, revealing the infinite possibilities that lie beyond. Death Valley, with its scorching heat and unforgiving terrain, has been the final resting place for many an adventurer. But within its vast desert expanse lies a labyrinth of abandoned mines, remnants of California's gold rush era. And it was within one such mine that I unearthed a terrifying tale. I was part of a team of geologists surveying the valley for new mineral deposits. One day, after mapping the surface, we decided to explore an old mine reputed to be one of the deepest and oldest in the area. The entrance to the mine was a gaping black hole in the mountainside. The cool air emanating from within was a stark contrast to the blistering heat outside. We geared up, turned on our headlamps, and ventured in. The deeper we went, the more the outside world seemed to fade away. The only sound was our footsteps echoing through the endless dark corridors. But as we ventured farther, another sound reached our ears. A faint tapping, rhythmic and consistent. Curious, we followed the sound, which led us to a large cavern. In the middle stood a lone miner, hunched over and chipping away at the rock. The sight was perplexing. His clothing looked outdated, like something out of the 19th century, and his figure was translucent, with a ghostly pallor. As if sensing our presence, he stopped his work and turned to face us. His eyes were hollow, filled with an eternal sadness. Without uttering a word, he pointed to a section of the cavern wall. Approaching cautiously, we discovered an array of inscriptions. They chronicled the miner's story. Lured by the promise of gold, he had ventured too deep and became trapped, his calls for help forever echoing in the vast void of the mine. The apparition resumed his tapping, the sound now taking on a haunting quality. Each tap a plea, a cry for salvation. Feeling a mix of sympathy and fear, we decided to make our way out. But as we retraced our steps, the miner's tapping grew louder, echoing throughout the mine, as if begging us not to forget him. Upon exiting, we were greeted by the blinding sunlight and the familiar heat of Death Valley. The ghostly miner and his sorrowful tapping felt like a distant dream. However, when we reviewed our audio recordings from the exploration, the eerie tapping was clearly audible. Now, whenever I hear the echo of tools on rocks, I'm reminded of that forsaken miner and the countless souls who ventured into Death Valley's mines, never to return. The valley might be renowned for its natural beauty, but beneath its surface, it holds secrets, echoes of hopes, dreams, and tragedies from bygone eras. I grew up in California, and like many locals, I've taken countless road trips across its vast landscapes. But there's one trip I'll never forget, a detour into the unknown in the heart of Death Valley. During a summer road trip a few years back, my partner and I decided to drive through Death Valley late at night, aiming to beat the oppressive daytime heat. We had stocked up on snacks and water, but as the night wore on, our hunger grew, and we wished for a place to grab a warm meal. As if in answer to our prayers, we saw a neon sign flicker to life on the horizon, advertising a diner. We were deep in the desert, miles from any town, so finding a diner here was oddly out of place. But hunger won over skepticism, and we followed the sign. Pulling up, we found a quaint 50s-style diner, complete with the neon lights and checkered floors. A cheery waitress named Maggie greeted us. There were a few other patrons, which seemed odd given the late hour and remote location. We ordered burgers, and as we waited, I struck up a conversation with an elderly gentleman sitting at the counter. He spoke of the diner as a haven, mentioning he'd been coming there since the 50s. What was odd, though, was his mention of specific dates. Dates that went back further than any human could possibly live through. Before I could ask more, our order arrived. The food was delicious, perhaps the best burger I'd ever had. We paid, left a generous tip, and promised Maggie we would be back. As we continued our journey, my partner and I dozed off. We woke up to the morning sun, parked on the side of the road, with no diner in sight. Thinking we had simply lost our bearings, we drove around looking for it, but there was no trace of it. Curious, I did some research and found old tales of a diner in Death Valley, a mirage of sorts appearing only to those truly in need. Legend spoke of a terrible accident in the 50s where a diner caught fire and its occupants perished, trapped inside. Today, I'm convinced that the diner we visited was a fleeting glimpse into the past, a remnant replaying its heyday. It's a memory I hold close, a reminder of the thin veil that sometimes separates our world from the mysteries beyond. If you ever find yourself hungry and lost in Death Valley, keep an eye out for that neon sign. It just might lead you to the diner that exists between time and reality. Santa Monica is famous for its beautiful beaches, the iconic Ferris wheel, and its bustling pier. But underneath its bright lights and cheerful atmosphere, I discovered a chilling secret that still haunts me. It was a typical Saturday night. My friends and I decided to hang out at the pier, enjoy some street food, and take in the view of the vast Pacific. As the night wore on and the crowd thinned, a dare led me to a game of exploration beneath the pier. While the top of the pier was alive with laughter and music, the space underneath was a stark contrast. It was eerily silent except for the muted sounds of waves crashing against the pilings. The dim light from the pier above cast long shadows on the wet sand, creating a maze of dark and light. Venturing further, I noticed an old, weather-beaten door, half buried in the sand, with a rusted sign reading, "Employees Only." Drawn by curiosity, I managed to pry it open. Inside was a long-forgotten storage room filled with discarded carnival games and equipment. The air was thick with age and the musky scent of the sea. As I sifted through the relics, I came across a collection of old photographs. They depicted various scenes from the pier's early days, families, performers, and couples all dressed in early 20th century clothing. But what caught my attention was a recurring figure. In the background of each photo stood a tall man with hollow eyes, always watching, always present. Each photograph had a date written on the back, spanning decades, yet the man never aged. Chills ran down my spine when I felt a cold gust of wind from the back of the room. Turning around, I saw the same tall figure from the photographs, standing in the shadows, his gaze fixed on me. Panicking, I sprinted out of the room, not stopping until I reached the well-lit part of the pier. My friends, seeing the fear in my eyes, didn't ask questions and quickly accompanied me away. Later, I researched the pier's history and found multiple accounts of a tall man, believed to be a performer from the pier's early days, who tragically died in an accident. Locals said he never left and was occasionally seen wandering the pier and beach at night, searching for something or someone. While the Santa Monica Pier continues to be a place of joy and entertainment, I can't shake off the memory of that night. Beneath its cheerful exterior lies a reminder of its storied past. If you ever find yourself there after dark, be wary of the shadows, because they just might be watching you. Boston Opera House, a place of magnificence, where art and history meld into one. Its ornate architecture is a testament to bygone eras, and its walls have witnessed countless tales of passion, tragedy, and triumph. But there's one story that remains largely untold, hidden amidst the applause and standing ovations. It began on a night like any other. I was attending a performance of Swan Lake, a favorite of mine. As the ballet progressed, I became entranced by a dancer who wasn't listed in the program. Her movements were graceful, transcending the bounds of the stage, almost ethereal. Every pirouette and leap seemed to defy gravity. During the intermission, I inquired about her, but to my surprise, no one else seemed to have noticed her. They attributed my query to being captivated by the main performers, but I was certain of what I had seen. The ballet resumed, but she was nowhere in sight. That was until the final act. As the curtain slowly descended, she appeared at the edge of the stage, bathed in a single spotlight, dancing a melancholic solo. As her dance reached its climax, she vanished, leaving only echoing silence behind. Intrigued, I decided to delve into the history of the opera house. Buried in the archives, I found a tragic story from the 1920s. Lillian, a prodigious ballerina, was set to debut her solo performance, but on the eve of her premiere, she mysteriously vanished, never to be seen again. The lore goes that on some nights, when the moon is just right and the stars align, Lillian returns to the stage she never got to grace, dancing her heart out for an audience she never had. Returning to the opera house weeks later, I managed to find an elderly usher who had been working there for decades. When I mentioned Lillian, his eyes clouded with a mix of fear and sadness. He whispered to me that over the years, select attendees, especially those deeply passionate about ballet, have reported seeing a mysterious dancer, always during Swan Lake, always dancing a solo during the curtain call. Lillian's spirit, it seems, is forever intertwined with the opera house, her passion and dedication transcending time. She remains a silent testament to the artists of yesteryear, a reminder that art, in its purest form, is eternal. Now, every time I visit the Boston Opera House, I find a seat in the balcony, gazing at the stage, hoping to catch a glimpse of the timeless dancer, forever trapped between the world of the living and the embrace of the arts. San Francisco is a city of layers, of histories piled upon histories. Its storied streets have witnessed countless tales, but the one I stumbled upon in the famous Haight-Ashbury district was nothing short of otherworldly. As a photography enthusiast, I was eager to capture the eclectic mix of Victorian homes, psychedelic murals, and colorful characters of this iconic neighborhood. As sunset approached, the district was bathed in a soft golden glow, making it the perfect backdrop. As I meandered through the streets, an old faded mural caught my eye. It depicted a band playing music, surrounded by jubilant dancers, a perfect representation of the summer of love. But what was most striking was a young woman painted in the center. She had piercing blue eyes and a look of profound sadness, incongruent with the celebratory scene around her. Curiosity piqued, I set up my camera, but as I peered through the viewfinder, I was taken aback. The young woman appeared to be moving, dancing slowly amidst the static figures of the mural. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but there she was, twirling gracefully, her eyes never leaving mine. An elderly local, seeing my astonishment, approached and shared the legend of Blue-Eyed Lucy. Lucy was a young woman from the late 1960s, drawn to Haight-Ashbury by the promise of love and freedom. But her dreams were tragically cut short when she vanished one summer night, leaving behind only rumors and whispers. The mural, the local explained, was painted in her memory by a heartbroken lover, and it was said that at twilight, when the world blurred between day and night, Lucy would dance once again, searching for the love she had lost. Chills ran down my spine as I looked back at the mural. Lucy had returned to her static form, but her eyes, those haunting blue eyes, seemed even more alive. That night, as I reviewed my photographs, one image stood out. Amidst the vibrant colors and lively scenes of Haight-Ashbury was a hazy silhouette of a dancing figure with unmistakably piercing blue eyes. A soft, melancholic tune seemed to echo in my ears, a haunting reminder of the love and loss embedded in the very walls of the city. To this day, I often think of Lucy when the golden hues of twilight envelop the world, and the liminal space between day and night, the past and present. Perhaps we are all given a fleeting chance to find what we've lost. If you ever find yourself in Haight-Ashbury at sunset, keep an eye out for those blue eyes. They might just be looking for you. There are places in California where the modern world seems to blur, fading away to reveal a land that time forgot. Humboldt County, with its towering ancient redwoods, is one such place. And I learned, during one unforgettable camping trip, that it might be home to more than just trees. Eager to escape city life for a while, I planned a solo camping trip in the heart of the Humboldt redwoods. My destination was a remote site, far from any trail, a place where I could truly be alone. The first evening was peaceful. The silence was only broken by the chirping of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves. But as night deepened, another sound joined the forest's natural chorus, a soft, almost mournful humming. I emerged from my tent, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees to find the source, but the dense foliage revealed nothing. Unnerved but exhausted, I attributed the humming to my imagination and tried to sleep. The next day, while exploring a nearby grove, I stumbled upon a small clearing. At its center stood an ancient tree, its bark scarred with symbols that looked like a mix between indigenous carvings and something far older. As I touched the markings, the same haunting humming filled the air. Startled, I turned to see an elderly woman, her appearance weathered yet timeless, standing at the edge of the clearing. In a voice filled with sorrow, she spoke of the forest's memory and the spirits it harbored. The tree, she explained, was a memorial for her ancestors, and the humming was their song, a lament for the land they once called home. She invited me to sit with her by the tree. As night fell, she sang the song of her people, a tune filled with longing, love, and loss. The forest seemed to echo her sentiments, joining in the mournful melody. When morning came, I found myself alone in the clearing, the ancient tree standing silent. The woman was nowhere to be seen. I later learned from locals that the woman I described had passed away 20 years ago, but her spirit and the spirits of her ancestors were said to still roam the redwoods. My trip to Humboldt changed me. I had gone seeking solitude, but found a connection to a world beyond our own, a world where the past lingers, singing its song for those willing to listen. If you ever venture into the ancient groves of Humboldt, tread softly and listen closely. The trees might just share their stories with you. When most people think of San Francisco, they imagine the Golden Gate Bridge, trolley cars, or maybe sourdough bread. But my memories are dominated by an eerie encounter on Alcatraz Island, one that still chills me to the bone. A bit of background. Alcatraz, for those who don't know, is the infamous prison island located in San Francisco Bay. It housed some of America's most notorious criminals until it closed in the 1960s. It's a popular tourist destination now, and being a history buff, I was eager to check it out. My trip to the island started out normally. The guided audio tour is creepy enough on its own, with former inmates and guards recounting tales from the prison's heyday. But things took a strange turn when I decided to break away from the main group. Drawn to a solitary cell at the end of a corridor, I felt an inexplicable need to explore it further. As I stepped inside the dim cell, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, a bone-chilling cold. I heard soft whispers, seemingly emanating from the walls themselves. Straining my ears, I could discern a single phrase repeated over and over. "They won't let me out. They won't let me out." Panicking, I tried to leave the cell, but found, to my horror, that I couldn't move. It felt as if unseen hands were holding me in place. The whispers grew louder, more desperate. I felt an overwhelming sense of despair, an emotional maelstrom of loneliness, anger, and regret. Just as suddenly as it began, the grip released me. The cell was silent once more. Stumbling out, I quickly rejoined the tour group, trying to shake off the terror. Once we were back on the mainland, I approached one of the tour guides, hesitantly recounting my experience. She said that there had been an inmate, a solitary prisoner who had been confined to that particular cell for an unusually long time. Rumors suggested he had gone mad, constantly whispering about being trapped forever. I've never been one to believe in ghosts, but that day on Alcatraz, I felt an undeniable connection to the island's dark past. There's a weight to history, especially places steeped in pain and suffering, and sometimes it reaches out, reminding us of the souls that once inhabited it. Napa Valley, with its sprawling vineyards and lavish wineries, is known to be a paradise for wine lovers. But one autumn evening, while on a solo retreat, I encountered a mystery that turned this picturesque haven into a realm of the inexplicable. Eager to explore the valley's renowned vineyards, I booked a small cottage on an old winery estate. The property was beautiful. Rows of grapevines stretched as far as the eye could see, framed by the purples and golds of the setting sun. On my first evening, while sipping a glass of wine on the porch, an elderly gentleman approached from the vineyard. Dressed in dated overalls, he introduced himself as Thomas and said he was the caretaker of the land. We chatted about the history of the estate, and he mentioned that the vineyard had been in his family for generations. Thomas invited me for a walk, offering to show me a part of the vineyard not usually accessible to visitors. Curious, I followed him down a narrow pathway that led to an old gated section of the vineyard. Thomas explained that this part of the estate was abandoned and had remained untouched for decades. As we entered, the atmosphere changed. The air grew cooler, and the usual sounds of nature fell silent. At the heart of this secluded area stood an ancient, gnarled grapevine, distinctly different from the others. Its grapes were a deep shade of black, and its leaves shimmered under the twilight. Thomas began to recount a tale passed down in his family. This vine, he said, was believed to be cursed. Legend spoke of a forbidden love between an ancestor of his and a rival vineyard owner's daughter. They would secretly meet at this very spot, but when their affair was discovered, it led to a tragic end. As a symbol of their undying love, the couple supposedly buried 2 intertwined vines here, which grew into this singular dark grapevine. Suddenly, a soft whisper filled the air, and ghostly apparitions of a young man and woman appeared, dancing gracefully among the vines. Their translucent figures glided effortlessly, lost in a timeless embrace. Stunned, I looked over at Thomas, but to my shock, he too had become translucent, fading into the misty surroundings of the vineyard. The next morning, I hurriedly sought the estate owner to recount the previous evening's events. To my surprise, he revealed that there was no caretaker named Thomas, and that the story that I shared was from a local legend from over a century ago. Today, I'm convinced that the spirit of Thomas and the tragic lovers of the vineyard shared their story with me that evening. Napa's vineyards may be famous for their wines, but for me, they'll forever hold a tale of timeless love, reminding us that passion, once rooted, can transcend even the boundaries of time. Symphony Hall, home to the Boston Symphony Orchestra, is renowned for its flawless acoustics and architectural splendor. Little did I know, however, that the hallowed hall is also played host to sounds from beyond our realm. I had recently joined the team as an audio technician, a job that often required me to be in the hall during odd hours, testing equipment and ensuring everything was set for performances. One evening, after the last musician had left, I stayed behind to calibrate a new sound system. With the vast hall empty and silent, I set to work. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of a violin filled the room. The melody was mournful, yet beautiful, echoing through the hall with perfect clarity. Initially assuming that a musician had stayed behind to practice, I followed the sound to its source. However, when I reached the main stage, it was completely empty. The music, meanwhile, seemed to be emanating from a specific seat in the audience. Approaching cautiously, I found an old photograph on the seat. It was of a young woman, violin in hand, her eyes reflecting a deep passion for music. Puzzled, I showed the photograph to an elderly janitor who had worked at Symphony Hall for decades. His face turned pale as he shared the tale of Eleanor, a prodigious violinist from the 1920s, touted to be the next big sensation in classical music. On the eve of her debut performance at Symphony Hall, she tragically passed away, her dream of playing on the grand stage left unfulfilled. Legend had it that her spirit still visited the hall, playing her violin, pouring her soul into every note, ensuring her music resonated in a place she held so dear. Skeptical, yet intrigued, I placed a recorder in the hall every night. Each morning, I would find a new recording of a mysterious violin solo, each more poignant than the last. Though I never saw Eleanor's spirit, I felt her presence every time I stepped into Symphony Hall. Her haunting melodies became a testament to the undying passion artists hold for their craft, transcending even the barriers of life and death. Now, when the lights dim and the audience settles, I often close my eyes, listening intently, hoping to catch a note or two from Eleanor's violin. A spectral serenade, forever echoing within the walls of Symphony Hall.